So I want to show you a fun website for those who like languages and maps, like me. So this is called the World Atlas of Language Structures. So basically, it's a big database of a bunch of linguistic features of one kind or another, and each of them is plotted on a map. So you simply take for each language, it gets one dot on the map. So you can see how certain features are distributed around the world. So let's take a look at the main. To get to the main site here, you go to features, and now you have just a whole giant list of features. So there's 192 different linguistic features that are covered, and here you can look at the different categories of them. So you can see, well, let me try something like, let's do something simple like basic word order. So here's one of the most basic ways and popular ways that languages are classified, and that is by the basic word order of subject, verb, and object. So you can open it up, and here we have feature 81A, order of subject, object, and verb. So you can see the chart here lists these different colors, although also with circle versus diamond. I mean, you think they could use a few different colors here. So anyway, you can play around and make it more pleasing, the distribution. I think they could have used more than 3. But here, yeah, in fact, I think the ones that need to change are these, because these are kind of rare ones. So we'll give it like a fancy purple, and OSV will give that, let's say, like, give that like a pinkish purple kind of thing. So, because those are rare. So when we look at these, the basic word order, we can see that most of the world is going to be either subject, object, verb, like you see cases like Japanese, or it will be subject, verb, object, which is what we are most familiar with. For example, in English, I see you, subject, verb, object. Whereas like in a SOV language, which is in fact even more common worldwide in terms of number of languages, you would say like IUC. So that's also very common. So here we have these features are now placed on a map, and you can see how they have certain clustering tendencies, which is interesting to see. So between the top two, you have SVO, very popular in Europe. They have the exception, okay, Basque is a very unusual language that doesn't fit in with the rest of the European languages. And what's this other one? Sorbian. Okay, I don't know about that one. Okay, and then within Asia, within most of Asia, we see that it's the subject, object, verb order that is predominant. So you really see these regional clusterings. Now these clusterings are they're beyond simply individual language families. Like here you can see, like in India, like you have the Northern Indian languages, which would be in the Indo-European language family, and the Southern Indian would be in the Dravidian language family, completely genetically unrelated languages, but they share that basically almost all throughout India, except, okay, is it Patani? The exception, otherwise, IUC, or subject, object, verb, is the way that they like to do it in South Asia. Whereas in Southeast Asia, we see the subject, verb, object, ICU pattern. So yeah, interesting how I'm surprised how much it actually clusters based on region, because you certainly don't see this for all linguistic features. There's many that have a much more scattered distribution. Similarly, you see along the Sahel region, Central Africa, you get some SOV, but throughout the main, I guess this would be the whole The whole Bantu language family. Throughout most of Africa, you see subject, verb, object. And here, like in the Americas, you see a bit more of a scattering, mixed setup. So then we can look at there's a rare this rare type here is languages that put the verb first. You can see that this is much less common. Basically, most languages around the world like to put the subject first. It certainly seems natural for English, but I mean, there's no reason to assume that it would have to be that way. And in some of these languages, put the verb first. And that some of the famous examples would be Arabic. And you also see examples like in Tagalog. And there's also, if we can scroll up to get to the Celtic languages, they also put the verb first. And then there's these exotic types of putting the object first. Well, I can't even find them on the map. They're so unusual. It's only 15 languages in the world put the object first. You can see that overall, it is much preferred to put the subject before the object. And only this scattering of languages at the bottom here, they're the only ones that put the object first. And then, of course, there's many languages that have no set order, because many languages have a much more free word order than we're used to in English, that because every word is marked in a certain way to identify it as being subject, object, or whatever, and you basically can say the words in any order. And you can kind of stretch it in English. You can say you, I see, and like you can have these kinds of but it always sounds like a kind of like a specially, modified or like a poetic form of the sentence. But there are some languages where you can basically say things in any order and it would all be fine. So you can see that quite a few Australian languages are like that. And many of the North American indigenous languages also have that. Okay, so that's just one example of what you can see going on in this atlas. So it's the same idea for any of these features. So let's take a look at some other interesting features here. One interesting area is in the number of genders. So if we look at, of course, we might assume that how many genders are possible? Well, it could be anywhere from 0 to 5 or more. So the concept of gender when it comes to language is pretty open. It can refer to really any kind of a category, and the most popular category is to divide into masculine and feminine genders, and possibly a neuter gender as well. But there are other ways to divide categories, such as being animate versus inanimate, so like living versus non-living, or sort of like human versus non-human, and different combinations, and so on. So here, let's look at this distribution. Well, one thing that stands out is that the complex gender systems with 5 or more genders, these are concentrated in Africa, as well as a few here in Papua and Northern Australia. But so that's really quite concentrated. And the idea of 3, so that would typically be masculine, feminine, and neuter. Yeah, kind of mixed in. Also, we see over, a lot of East Asia is really the non-gender. And of course, the idea of being non-gender language just means that there's no kind of special grammatical agreement where the verb or whatever has to agree with the gender, and so on. Of course, they still have genders and they can talk about the meaning of genders, but it's just not baked into the language as this kind of grammatical category. So you see all that over in East Asia, lack of linguistic gender mostly, and throughout the Pacific, and a lot of these indigenous languages as well, like the whole Pacific coast of North America. All these languages lack grammatical gender. So it is interesting to see these kinds of clusters. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more. So you can really I recommend on this chart, click on the area here so you can divide by these different areas. We could take some kind of a phonological point. Well, yeah, I'm interested in what languages have tones, phonological tones. What languages have a tone system? So here we see some interesting clustering where so we have most, of course, English and most of the European languages almost entirely have no tone system. Although surprisingly, Norwegian and Latvian have some kind of a simple tone system, which is surprising. You don't normally think of them that way. And even like languages like Japanese is not considered normally a tonal language, but it does have a certain kind. It has a pitch accent system, which does involve the changing the pitch of your speech in some way that affects the meaning, and that is what a tone system is all about. Tone, of course, speakers of any language have their pitch, their voice going up and down, but it doesn't carry any linguistic meaning in English. I can speak up and down in the way I speak my sentence, and it will sound strange, but it will not actually change the meaning of the sentence. But in a tone system, by changing your pitch, you actually change the meaning somehow. So here we see some simple tone systems and some very strong clustering here for complex tone systems. Of course, the most famous tonal language being Chinese. And we see that, but that same pattern is found throughout southern China, Southeast Asia. Very popular to have these complex tone systems. So it really has a clustering here, as well as you can see this clustering in West and Central Africa. Otherwise, interesting to see that the Australian languages are entirely without tone. Over the entire continent, not a single tonal language. And a mix here in the Americas, mostly non-tonal, but with a few exceptions. So that's always interesting to see. And here's another, we'll leave it with this interesting one here is when you get into lexicon. Some of these things can get quite technical, like, you're looking at like things like possessive inflection and, looking at verbal person marking. But the lexicon one, I think, is really kind of a fun one that's kind of easy to get into. So this course has to do with lexicon means like the dictionary, the mental dictionary of the words of a language, and this has to do with how some words are handled. So let's look at the number of basic color categories. This is kind of interesting. How many basic colors are there? Now, this would be, well, the smallest number has only 3 to 4, and the largest number is 11. So that's what we have here. Now, I'd be curious to know exactly how do they count this. You can see that here they're not including all the languages. So this is a limited selection. But there are some, you can see these languages of Europe and East Asia, you have a large number. But there's some languages that really only have 3 to 4 basic color categories. And that would mean that other colors have to be derived from them. That this one, I'd say it's a little bit opaque, you could say. Like it's a little bit unclear exactly how they're breaking this down. You have to look into the source. Each of these features has a link to a source where they are talking about that feature. So you can look into it further. Like have some like what are the most basic colors, and then there's this whole look at all these different color systems. Where do you draw the line between colors? For example, one thing that I found surprising is this whole idea of green and blue. There's many languages where green and blue have the same word. Although, of course, we're used to saying green versus blue. But, many languages treat them as the same color. All over Papua here, most of Central Africa, Central South America. So that's a surprising feature. Now what? Well, I haven't heard of this one, red and yellow. Red and yellow having the same word. That's quite striking. You can see that this is much less popular, but it is found in a lot of West Africa and a few spots in South America. Interesting. And ooh, what's this? What's this one for tea? I believe there's 2 words for tea. Yes, mainly from, and they both come from different forms of Chinese. It's either cha or te. So the world basically divides between cha-based and tea-based, like we have in English. So like tea and then like te in French and so on. So, and then a few languages have another word. Though it's interesting for the word coffee, there's also an interesting map. They don't have it here, but for the word coffee, you basically have almost the entire world, except Ethiopia. I believe is one of the only exceptions, and I think maybe Armenia. These are the only, or is it Georgia? The only exceptions where they have a different word. Everybody else uses the word coffee. So that's an interesting example of how one word basically conquered the world. Okay, last one. We'll take a look at hand versus oh no, here's what we gotta do. Numeral basis. This is a fun one. So how do we base our counting? Of course, we're used to decimal. But you can see some mention of here this hybrid vigesimal decimal, vigesimal meaning based on 20. And that's what you see in French that, oh no, they're not even counting that as, well, no, French has the leftovers of vigesimal, as you see, like they have words like 80, which means like 4 times 20, and that's how they say 80. But that is that's kind of like a leftover relic, and maybe it's not considered to be an active vigesimal system. Purely vigesimal, there's still a few left over, and you can see a bunch of extended body part systems, other bases. So you can see while decimal rules most of the world, there are still some other interesting ways. And this idea of restricted means they don't really necessarily count in the same way that would be expected, as you see in Australia. So there's some interesting clustering. So anyway, you can see like this, there's, really doesn't, there's no end to all the different interesting things that can be seen on this website. So although some of them, they can be quite technical, I really recommend this website for anybody who enjoys both languages and maps. Really get a sense of how some of these features are distributed. And it's all part of this overall question of how much are languages different, how much are they the same. In many ways, it's surprising how different languages are, and yet also surprising how similar they are.